Linda Green Metzler is our demonstrator this evening. She holds a BFA in painting from Scripps College at the Claremont Colleges. She's a juried member of the Best Missouri Hands in Fine Arts since 2004, a signature member of both the St. Louis Watercolor Society, and is currently represented by the Codner Gallery, the Creative Art Gallery, and Remington's. You can learn more about Linda at lgmetzlerart.com. And she's also a phenomenal plein air artist. I don't know if you guys remember, but a couple of years back, she did a wonderful demo on us on the joys of plein air painting. And that is the finished piece. So without further ado, let's give a warm round of applause and a great Northside welcome to Linda Green Metzler.
Thank you. I'm glad to see you. I want to find out right away, was anyone here at the demonstration I gave a few years ago? Okay. Oh, fresh audience. I went and I looked at the video. Thank you for reminding me, Amy. And I didn't want to repeat myself. So I guess I won't be repeating myself no matter what I say. Everyone is working in a different medium, but hopefully I'm speaking in a general way, art in general, things like composition and color and line, so it'll apply to whatever medium that you're working in. Okay? So how many watercolor people do I have here? Okay, great, okay, super, okay. So, some of what I say will be familiar ground, but I definitely work with line, shape, color, composition are my cardinal, guidelines. And this is a piece that if you go to the website and you look up the video, this, the inception of this is what you're going to see. Okay, I finished it in the studio, and what I used in this, I had not introduced the ink to it while I was demonstrating it before. Okay, but every piece that I brought here, except this group over here, another purpose, has been done with watercolor and ink. And there's a very specific reason. I just like the way it looks. I like to have I like to commit to shape. I'm not what you call a particularly painterly painter, where I'm very involved in texture and kind of watery. A lot of people use watercolor in a very different way than I do. I was trained as an oil painter, so I tend to think that way when I'm actually doing a composition. So I tend to work more hard edge, and so that's why I like the line, and I especially like it when I'm doing plein air painting. How many of you have done open air, plein air painting out in the landscape? So some of you have some experience with it. Well, when you're out there, things change quickly. The light changes, the color changes because the light changes. So you're working fast. I find watercolor a slow medium because to get bright, intense colors, you have to layer. So the oil painters, they mix it up and they slap it on and they're committed. Okay? It doesn't quite work that way in watercolor because you're constantly thinking about whether or not the light is showing through and giving you brightness for your colors. So my strategy that I developed is you have minimum is probably about 2 hours. Usually it's about 4 or 5 hours that you work on a piece. So when I'm out there and all of these pieces, except that one, these have all been done out of doors in the open air, and it takes me a while to establish the composition. I spend a good hour working out the pencil drawing first before I ever put any paint on it, because I want to make all those decisions about where basically things are going to go before I start working with the paint, because I don't want to make a lot of changes in watercolor. Because it's harder to make changes. Yeah. You can scrape off oil paint and start fresh. But with watercolor, you're committed. If I want a lavender and pink area, I'm not going to be changing that to green real easily. So I have to decide where my shapes are going to go and my objects and my basic composition before I put that color on there. Well, I do that, then I decide where I want the light to go, because it's been changing the whole hour or two that I've been working all this out. I make my color decisions after I make my composition decisions, and then I start thinking about where is my light going to be coming from for that particular scene. So in all of these, my most successful ones I think are very often backlight, because it doesn't change a lot. You know, if the sun is shining directly on the side of the street that you're working on like that, you know, there's going to be a lot of changes in 3 or 4 hours on that white building. So that's hard. But if you're in a situation where, this was raining, it was raining this day. So I didn't have too many problems with figuring out where the light was coming from, because it was a dull gray day, and the story is really about the color of the flowers and the watery feel against the high contrast of the flowers in the foreground. So that was my decision about what was going to be important in that painting. But when I'm in a situation like this, where there's a very definite direction that the light is coming from, that's where I have to make where are my highlights going to go? I have to make those decisions and stick with it. I can't be changing those every time I decide that I want to adjust it. And here, another way to get around that is the light is basically on the field, and the trees are they're close to me and they are in shadow, so I don't have a lot of problems that are created by changing light if I make a decision like that. So I think that what I'm saying is here that I've made decisions in a certain order, and then when it comes to the line, the reason I go into the mixture of ink line with the watercolor is that I can sock in those shapes and give a punch and a kind of authority to the picture that if I were to do it all in watercolor, I couldn't get in that time frame. I can do it if I take it back into the studio. And over here, you'll see where I've developed a piece like this. I will take a photograph while I'm working on her, and I'll spend maybe 3 or 4 hours working. Well, but there was a lot of light changes, okay? But I can't get, this is all paint. There is no ink in this one. But I was able to get the definition because I had the time. I had the time to devote to doing fine lines with a brush in combination with the big areas of color. I don't have that kind of time. Most sessions, like, you know, I'll put another 4 hours in the studio into that to get like some detail in the guitar, the face, the hair. You know, I can do those things if I'm working from a photograph at my leisure in the studio. I can't do that when I'm out somewhere like this. There just isn't time to do it. So the way I get the punch, and here's the thing about plein air. You're competing with all mediums. They don't have like a watercolor section and an oil section like they do in some shows where they're judged differently, like they'll have just a watercolor show. So what I find is that I stand up to the oil painters and the people who paint with more dense mediums better if I put that black line in there. So that's part of my rationale for doing it. Okay, now what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about this group. I have a friend who lives out in New Haven, lovely farm country, who has artists out. Her name is Julie Wiegand. She loves to have people come out when she has her painting days, and she has a model come in who's always someone from the area. Many of them are musicians, because that works great. They can play their instrument and not get bored to death while we paint. And also it gives animation, it gives an activity feeling. It's a lot more fun and challenging to do than just a static model sitting in a chair. Even this one, where you have the woman, she's working on some needlework or some kind of a loom, and so she's busy. You're going to have to, when you work this way, you have to do a pretty quick gesture drawing, and that's what I'm going to do right now with you guys. That's what I'm actually going to put to paper here, is some impressions of people sitting, listening to a lecture. So you have to make some quick decisions, although they might not return to that position the whole time that you're working on it, but then they might, you know, and you can ask them to. So that's the rationale there. One of the ways I got around this is I kept the hands out of it, and she basically had the guitar in the same position the whole time, and there was movement, and because she was focused on music, it was a little easier to get the head and the face. It was helping me out. And then here we had piano players are a little easier, and here is the guy playing the piano, and Julie, who was our host, is in the background painting on her easel. This is in her studio. Okay, then, which is probably what I'm going to end up doing now, there's the real, how am I going to do this if there's a lot of activity? Well, this was, I'm just telling you this because it was an interesting experience. There was a string quartet that came to play. Some music society sponsored them. They were very fine. You know, they gave concert at, I think the Sheldon, you know, in other words, but somebody organized a painting event where we got to paint them during their rehearsal, which was in the upper level, excuse me, of the Sheldon concert hall. Well, they only played like for half an hour. I mean, you just had to really think fast. And obviously, I'm not going to do a portrait. I'm not even going to do, you know, anything as developed as this. But how am I going to communicate the experience of being there for this musical event? Well, I paint intellectually a lot. You know, I don't just do what I see. I say, what is really going on here? Well, you know, I want to communicate there's music, there's a stage, there's lots of musicians, not just one, and suggest the kind of instruments they're playing just by their gesture attitude. You know, there was the cello, there was the piano, and instead of doing the piano, I said, what is a shape that would imply piano? And it was the open piano, and, you know, just that shape there. And then the idea of performance, and then I think the zinger was that I got to show that they are playing music, and so I just put the sheets of music in there in a very cryptic, general way. So this is probably what I'm going to end up doing right now because we don't have a lot of time. But I'm going to try to do something that makes a statement. This was a similar situation. This was a woman playing an accordion. So how do we do that? Well, you know, I got to have the idea of the accordion come across pretty quick. So it's keys, it's black and white, it's the particular way you hold an accordion, no realism in the way that hand is, but just the idea of there is a hand there, and it's going to be pumping that accordion. And then just picking up items. This is a Matisse thing. He did it all the time. He would pick up, if you've ever seen a photograph of Matisse's studio, it would blow your mind because it's really just a lot of junk sitting around. But then you see what he did with that. He would pick up the pattern in the fabric over there. He would pick up the frame of the window over there. He would choose different elements and combine them in just wonderful design. But he didn't paint everything that was there. He was extremely selective. And he would pick, and in these photographs, the colors, you know, they're not there. but he would find them, and he would be looking out the window, and he would find a color out the window that would affect how he would portray the colors that were on the rug that was hanging on the wall. So I guess what I'm saying here is you need to be flexible and inventive, and that's what will inject a lot of life into your picture. Okay, so here's what I do. I normally would start with a little thumbnail, but I don't really have time for that now. So I'm just going to jump into this. So you can actually add. But what is exciting is the different ways people are sitting. You know, everybody's got a different way of being attentive, you know, different way of concentrating. And these great colors. I've got pink, I've got lavender, I've got aqua, I've got stripes, I've got patterns. You know, to me, that's the one thing I see that would make an interesting painting. Okay, so that's what I'm going to look at. Okay, now how I'm going to do this so you can see, it's not going to be real easy, but I am. So anyway, I'm going to, and I'm not going to worry too much about backgrounds at all in this, but in my training, this is something I did a lot of. I started at 14 years old I'm from Chicago, and I went to the Art Institute of Chicago as a high school student when I could, like on Saturdays or in the summer. And the first thing we all did was figure drawing. They'd have somebody in a clown costume or somebody in a dancing costume. And we started drawing the figure from the time we were 14 years old. And from that experience, I just kept taking figure drawing, figure painting. And then I went, in high school, I mostly did academics, but my art would be at the Art Institute. When I went to college, I went to a school that specialized at Scripps. They had a marvelous fine arts program. And I did, it was in California, and so color was the big thing. Then I took a year out and went to New York, and I studied at the Art Students League of New York, and it was figure painting, and it was skylights, and everything was muted tones, almost kind of like a Renaissance kind of thing. And it was classic figure drawing. But that has been the thing that has really sustained me all. When I go out in the landscape, I'm thinking the same way about the shapes and where do they join and, you know, the composition. The basis of that was figure drawing. That is the foundation. And I started at 14. So, you know, for 20 years I was doing that. And then I was in commercial art for 30 years, doing layout, design, and illustration. And there again, line is really important if you're working with graphics. You know, it's not so much representing objects as it's organizing shapes. So those are two very strong influences in the way I work. I carry those with me when I go out to the landscape or to do buildings. It doesn't matter if I'm doing buildings or trees or whatever. The same principles of relationship of shapes, action, what is the gesture. Buildings to me have gestures. If you'll notice, when I work with these buildings, they kind of tilt, they kind of do things. I don't work statically. This is a good example. This is, believe it or not, the first church in St. Charles that was recently restored. The building was built the original one was 1791. So it's been around a long time. Tiny little structure. It's wood. You know, it's got the classic French style roof and big timbers. Everything is made out of wood. But you know, I like to make them come to life, and I don't like to do them static. And to me, it felt like it was old and it was leaning and kind of, Anyway, so animation is the spirit of a lot of the buildings that I do. This is also St. Charles, and again, this is part of my commercial background with illustration, because what you're seeing in these is I'm picking up on the whimsical details all around, like there's a chicken and there's a, you know, a corn stalk, but I got it all in there. See, I'm telling a story. We got the foreground, we've got the train station, which is a big thing in St. Charles. You got the river, even the river is in there. Back there, you're looking at the river and then the banks. So, in other words, I'm trying to tell everything that's going on, you know, and that's where the line, that's where the ink comes in, because you can get away with murder with the details if you can control them with a pen. But first I'm going to make a little bit of a plan here, and so I'm just going to pick up a few figures. And this is going to be, you know, extremely rough, and I'm just trying to get and I'm going to do a little air measuring here, just for the heck of it, to see. When you work like this, you kind of just and this is extremely difficult because I am looking at this and then turning around and looking at it, so that's not easy. But I'm trying to pick up a couple of things, like if it's his attitude, just attitude, you know, a few things. Now I'm going to go where Amy is here because I have to work on that side. Okay, and so it's totally arbitrary. I'm just picking elements out of what I see, okay, in the audience, and now, one of the reasons I'm doing that is I'm trying to figure out what's coming toward me and what's receding in space. That's a big thing. You know, if you're going to get any feeling of what's really happening, you got to have a feel. And what I'm seeing here with this gentleman is that the folded arms are coming forward and you're leaning back. And so I'm trying to make the shoulders smaller. And exaggerate that a bit, so it gives that feeling of leaning back, okay? It's those little details of relationship that will make a gesture work. And I'm not going to do faces, anything like that right now. That's not the deal. And then here, I'm just really, I like this shirt. I just really like this shirt. That's what is catching my eye right now, is the stripes, you know? The idea that we can put some patterns. And what's cool too is the big sleeve, you know, which is a little different than some of the other. And proportionately, I'm not sure I'm anywhere near, but I don't really care. It doesn't really matter. But I'm gonna maybe just a few tiny characteristic. I've got to get my eraser. I know I've got one. What did I do with it? Here it is. My little, see how, I don't want that to look like. Okay. And then I'm going to make a couple of arbitrary, see, I'm going to put people on different levels here, just because I can see them. And what I like over here is the jacket. It's got a neat look to it, the way the collar is falling. So I'm just picking up on just arbitrary details as to why I think that might make an interesting composition. And I needed levels, you know, in other words, I didn't want to go straight across like that. I wanted to get some raised levels and here, this is working here, okay? Because we've got somebody leaning this way. That's good. Okay. And that's really about all I'm going to try to do. I see a couple of details. There's a nice round fan up there. It'll just give me a little wall detail that I want to anchor it in space. I want to see something that's going on here. I really should have done this right on, you know, look at all that time I used. I could have done that right onto the watercolor paper, but I didn't, but I got it. Okay, now, what else are we going to do here? There's one other thing I can do here that might help me create some interest and there's a brown shade over there. So I just need something, and then I think what I'm going to do is bring the ceiling in like this. See, I'm not going to, but see, I need some areas that I can put some solid color in, or it's going to be really boring. So, and I see a couple of things that are happening here, and I see because the way the light's hitting that, this is warm. I'm even making myself, because this is a sketch, there's going to be a warm wall here, and then this is going to be cool. See, when you're doing a sketch, you can just make little footnotes to yourself, but see where I'm looking over there? And I can see a color change. And actually, I would like this better over here, because that's not really a big wall. Okay. I have no idea how I'm doing on time. I have no clue. And I totally rearranged what's going on, completely. You know? But, do we have a crowd?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, we got a crowd. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, and because I just invented a new way to do this, because I can see through it so well, I'm going to be able to quickly rough in where I put things. See? Now, I'm using, this paper is 300 pound. I've started doing that because when I use this mixed media method, I have no warp because I'm not using heavily loaded brushes. I don't have any warp, and the other thing I like about it, you see these paintings on the wall over here, I don't have to mat them. And that's something very handy when you're doing plein air, because it's, the poor watercolor and pastel artists are in this conundrum that the oil people don't even have to worry about. They stick it in a frame and they're done. Well, now I stick it in a frame and I'm done. I don't have to find a mat that fits, I don't have to tape, I don't have to do anything. I just stick it in there. Now it won't, some of these shows require that you have a mat, fine, but in that plein air setting, it is great to be able to just stick it up there, get you another half-hour paint, which is always handy. So anyway, so here, okay, what I'm doing is I'm going to pick up the lines, the general lines. I'm not all of them, but the ones I think that are important, I'm going to pick up here. And there's that gray jacket with the flare. I like that.
You have flare done.
You could put that on graphite paper?
Nah, I don't want to do that. Graphite is nasty to work with when you're put paint over it. You could. Now, if I were working in studio, I use a light table, and I would take this and I would put it under.
Okay.
And I probably wouldn't use 300-pound paper because I can't see through it.
So you can see 300.
Not too well, but I can if I set everything up right and put black around the entire sheet that I'm working on. I did do that with a piece I did, but it was a big piece with a mountain scene, and I was. But this is fine, I can see. Because you can see how rough I'm keeping it. I'm just looking for shorthand here. What's overlapping, what shapes. Because it is so rough, I can change it pretty easily. And that's why I use I use the 2B very soft pencils so they erase easily. And that's another reason I like the 300-pound paper, because it erases beautifully. You know, I don't have to worry about that. Okay, now, we didn't do too much with this. I had one chair, just to show that we're in a room with a lot of chairs. I'm not gonna overdo that part of it, but let's see what they got. Okay, so I got a plan, okay? See, basically I've got a plan. And I wanna get that ceiling in over here, because I think that's gonna give people a point of reference as to the fact that we're actually in a room. It doesn't take much. Okay, now, before I needed some shoulders, maybe a neckline. Now, if I were going to do a serious finished piece, I would likely take a photograph, bunch of, you know, just so I would have some reference. But for this, we're just gonna, now I'm gonna straighten some things out. And I'll show you how nicely this erases here. This works extremely well. I mean, it's gone. See, it's just completely gone. And I'm fond of round brushes because you can shift from points to washes very quickly. These are Sable Rhapsody brushes. You see how they have a nice point? And then, but these really hold a lot of water. So I can load it with paint, I can do a little detail, but I can do a wash right after it without switching brushes. Okay, now what did I do with my palette? Okay, I do need that. Normally, the palette I usually use is about twice this size. This just happens to be a little more portable right now. So, remember how I talked about color, and it was the thing that interested me most about what was going on here? So now I remember who's who. I don't remember who's who. Okay, I think I do. I think I do. Just a minute, I gotta remind myself. Oh yeah, a little more detail in this. Yeah, I do remember. Yeah, the turquoise is here. So I've got a real nice aqua. Okay.
It looks pretty.
Now, I usually don't work vertically. I tend to work a little more on a slant, so it's a little trickier. And I really, I want to get that. I'm not sure I have, but this will do. It's not quite what I want, because I really wanted to get that permanent rose look, which I don't know. Yeah, here it is. Is this it? No, aqua. No, I don't want aqua. Okay. I don't know. We'll just go with this one. My other palette has more of that paint loaded on it, so that was what I was thinking. No, this is it. This, I think I found it. It'll be all right. Just with the rose. It's good enough. But the idea is I'm going to get a nice range of colors. I'm confusing myself a little bit here.
Would it be easier to use carbon paper?
Probably, but
No.
I don't. My problem with that is that it doesn't come off very easily unless you press hard. It won't transfer very well. I wouldn't use standard. I would use graphite paper, but it's kind of pale. It's not as strong as a pencil, and it's a little more permanent than the pencil when you try to remove it.
Yeah, carbon paper would be lousy to work with.
That would be terrible because it's really ink.
Yeah.
It's not pencil. See. Okay, now I get already, you know, I see some things that I want to do. Like I think there is definitely more green in this that I want it different from the chair, and so I'm just gonna, making some decisions about color, basic color. I have no idea what direction this is gonna go, but okay, this amounts mostly to underpainting because I would make a lot of changes. See, now I've got, what I did there is I got the basic tone. I wanted a warm tone to have it be more flesh tone like, but then I remove, you know, so it isn't overwhelming. And then I can get some distribution of color. And I'm only looking for just the most basic of suggestion of figure here, just basic. And only some big, in other words here, because we're in a constant light, you can kind of get something going with the values. And now, while I'm thinking of it, and I know we aren't going to have a lot of time to finish, but I'm going to get this ceiling thing up here. The big mistake you can make is to get too involved in a detail before you've really distributed paint and color over the entire surface. So, you know, you can get a little too involved pretty quick. Now that's way too warm for what's really there. And I do want to cool it. So I'm going to, I didn't do, there we go. But look at how look at this paper. You know, it just goes away. And then if I take some clean water over that, that's going to go away completely. Again, it's working vertically. It's not my thing. But I'm not using any black or anything, even darker brown. I'm putting some lavender in there, you know, some.
Nice thing about 300-pound paper, you can put in a bathtub and wash it.
You can wash the whole, you know, start over. Might warp a bit. It's hard to unwarp once you warp this stuff, but I don't have my full palette here, so, I mean my color range that I normally would on my other one. But
what was the brand brush you used?
These are Rhapsody, Kolinsky Sable. And they go on sale periodically with Jerry's and Dick Blick. And you know, they'll have these periodic sales where they'll have like 60, 70. I mean, you can get them for a set of 5 for a really good price. 40, 50 bucks. You know, in other words, normally they're 3 or 4 times that. But if you watch the sales, you can really get something. Let's see, what was that? 1, 2. And where was, oh, I didn't, this is where I want this, yeah, here. Now, I'm going to do that little thing that I said I was going to do, where there's a slight warm tone to one of these walls.
It's neat that doesn't bleed very easily.
Yeah, runs, but doesn't.
Yeah.
Now, if I work dry on, I work wet on dry. I don't work wet on wet. If I were to wet the whole thing and squeegee it and do all that stuff, then you get all kinds of bleed. Mm-hmm. But I like to control it more than that. I really do. Now, I want to get that cool wall. It's slightly cool. I don't want that. That was there's some Payne's Gray, things like that are pretty nice to work with. What I don't have on this palette is mixing space. But I'm looking. I want a little cooler wall in here. Okay. And then there's an opportunity. I didn't do that right. Lost my place. Here, this is what we're going to do. Okay, it doesn't. But another thing that I'm trying to do here, you'll notice, I'm giving as much attention to the negative space as I am the positive. Because I want the entire surface to develop at the same time. I don't want to have objects in nebulous space. I want the negative shapes like these to be just as important as the positive shapes. And that's the way you get a cohesive composition, a cohesive painting, where they really are joined together and they become their own reality that way. Otherwise, you're giving more importance. If you give more importance to the object, you're kind of losing half your painting. You don't give as much attention to what's around the object. Okay, now I'm going to try to do something here. And you can see what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to indicate some jeans here. Oops, we're not doing that. Yeah, I'm not used to working upright like this.
That's okay, because it adds.
Yeah, I know. Some people like it. Who's that? Is it Neiman? Somebody who does that all the time, a sports illustrator. You know, it's all about the drifts. You know, he's got the bicycle rider and then all this color is dripping down. Bike rider thing. Yeah. But you see what I'm doing is I'm closing in so the spaces, see now the shirt is a long shirt, so I'm indicating that. And then I'm trying to give a little more character to the shoulders here. And then, oh, okay, now I see some opportunity. I see some there's some things going on now that I can start to notice since I've got a plan. That, in other words, we don't want this to be so boring that there are no variations in light. Yeah, it's interesting in this dull room how there's really more going on than you think, light-wise. But you see how I'm taking some of the tones that are in the figure and introducing them into the clothing so we get a little more feeling of light hitting the subject. And then edges are great to pay attention to because they tell us a lot. Like here, there's light spilling from the ceiling, and it's kind of warming up some of these areas. And I'm pretty far from what we call local color. You know, in other words, like the local color of Judy's shirt is aqua or turquoise, but there's warm tones on the shoulders. There's darker tones on the inner part of the sleeve. And in other words, there's some blues, but while I'm talking about it, I might as well be doing it. But here's some different blues. Oh, I'm making a bit of a splashy mess here. But I can see we've got some shadows going on. And then when it's up, seen against another figure, that's when we can kind of try to make one come forward and one recede in space. And then there's a little bit of a shadow coming in here because we have ceiling light. And I think we're starting to see that we have ceiling light by some of the things that we do in here. And even on this, we can see that there's more shadow on the lower part of the shirt. Okay, now I have to do something with this over here, and I'm trying to decide what. And there's kind of an odd, white, if you stare at it long enough, you can see all kinds of colors. And I'm seeing a little bit of a slightly greenish tone coming into the wall over there. And those things become important because, you know, a cooler tone will make the figure come forward. The stark white is going to kill it. But if you find in there some subtle, you know, I mean, I see 3 different colors on that wall behind you there that could actually go to our advantage. And then we have an opportunity here. I see a couple other things going on. See, you keep discovering things now that I'm getting serious about it, and I'm done drawing. Okay, I'm done drawing. Now I'm painting. Okay, and I see that I missed this altogether, where there is a wonderful kind of where your jacket is. There's a gray shape back here that can become useful. Okay. So it's hanging over there, and then that's the beginning of it, but it is probably one of the darker things in the room is that jacket there. So I can use that to bring the figure forward. And then what's fortunate there, I see I can pick up if I move a little and pretend that window shade, that brown window shade is behind there. I can even exaggerate this some more, and actually I'm going to do that. Another thing I like to be sure I don't neglect is the corners, because that's the way you make your space believable. Otherwise, they said, oh, somebody did a painting on that piece of white paper. Well, you're creating an illusion, and you're trying to trick people into coming into your world and seeing it the way you see it. And so that's what we're doing here by paying attention to the corners. It's like looking out a window, if you think of it that way. It's not a picture on a surface, it's I'm looking into a space, and I want to know what's in all the corners. It gives more reality to it. Okay, now I didn't know I was going to do that, but you know, I kind of like what's happening there. You know, it's kind of a surprise. And I'm trying to decide now. We've got something interesting. I can introduce some floor here, and the floor is going to be kind of quiet. A little bit of blue. That's too green. I never use black, but I do use Payne's Gray, and there's something. What is it called here? It's called. It's just a shadow tint. That's something. I think its name is something like that. I don't know if I've got it in this. I don't think I have it in this particular box, but I have it on my palette. But it's a way of, see, I really want to pay attention to those corners and make those corners go away. And there is a little bit of kind of rose in there too. Dark, but a little bit of rose that could make this chair come forward. Are you telling me that we're getting close?
You're getting close. 8:30. Usually we try to wrap it up between 8:30 and 8:45.
Okay.
So,
okay. All right. Well,
so you can do it in 15 minutes. I've seen you paint.
oh well, just wrap it up, Linda.
Yeah, we see what you're really driving at.
But you know, you see, in other words, I think that what we've got here, and then I'll use the last few minutes to show how you can be pretty bold. That I don't have the right color here. I would love to be able to mix this lavender a little better. But we're just gonna do it. We're just gonna put those stripes in there because I think they're cool. See? And it's interesting how just a little tiny detail like the earrings could kind of, you get a feel what's really going on, you know. And I'm going to do a little bit here with the brown, a little bit of. you've got a great line to the way the hair goes back, you know, and it works, you know, in other words, it's a good graphic. Yeah, which is cool, you know, and I would like play that up, especially in a situation like this where we're trying to get an impression of some things that are going on very quickly.
I'll just say you're just making her look good.
There you go.
She looks great.
I couldn't resist, I mean.
And I'm trying to think what I could do. It doesn't take much, see, you know, and we have this overhead light, so, you know, it doesn't take much to indicate a little more realistic feel of where the neck would come in and the, you know, and see, you don't really want much more than that, and when you're not developing the whole thing, you don't want to overdo it. So, I mean, I would have to get into it a little bit more here. But this is just very basic, and I think what I'm gonna, oh, I just noticed that color, it's got more orange in the pants things. I'm always looking for tones. Let's see. Oh, you know, I'm thinking about that camera, and I'm thinking about where can I stand that I can see, and I have no idea what's going on here because I'm not looking at things straight on.
It's fine, but you're still showing how to, which is really helpful.
Right.
Is there, you picking up some little tips here?
And the reason I took that tip out, because I didn't know a lot of people did not know, you flip paper over, you pencil on the outline, and you come back with a hard edge, and then it'll transfer it onto any kind of paper, and you don't have to worry about smears or anything like that. So.
That's good, that's good, that's good. Okay, so I'm gonna, okay, so you get how if I were to work on this for about 8 or 10 more hours, I could.
There you go.
But I want to get that jacket. I just really like that jacket. Don't touch the collar. Yeah, see, it's kind of cool. It just. Anybody see that show on PBS that just started, that series called The Collection about the fashion designer? Okay. Did you happen to notice the sketches?
Yes, I did.
Well, you know, I'm thinking that way right now, looking at the way some of the clothing is falling and how just with a swoop, he designs a whole dress. I mean, it was amazing.
You practiced a lot of it.
Yeah.
You practiced it 7 times.
Very interesting. It's a mystery. It's a lot of things, but the art part of it is really quite well done, I think. Okay.
An English soap opera.
Yeah, like many, it's a PBS, yeah. I don't fall into a category very easily. And that's probably the reason that I'm exhibiting and have work in the Codner Gallery. He says, you paint like you. You know, in other words, you're not copying somebody else. You are contributing something to it that is your vision and your vision alone. And that's why it's so important. Just be true to yourself. I mean, if you have an impulse to do something, go ahead and try it and forget the rules. You know, because it's really, you get mastery of the drawing. That's what I was talking about with all those years spent with figure drawing. But then, you know, you say, yeah, but, you know, if I want to capture the spirit, I'm not going to follow all the rules. I'm not going to make it look so realistic that it's boring. And I think that's a lot of painters who go out plein air and they're extremely proficient, as you know, Judy. I mean, you've seen this. You know, you get the Marty Coulters and all. Yeah, but, you know, I had somebody buy something at one of those shows out in Augusta, and they were looking around and he said, they're just painting what's there. But you're adding something unique to it. And that's a very personal thing. And just, you gotta trust your personal instincts. You gotta, if you decide that, I'm gonna try that, even if it isn't exactly proportionate or it's not, maybe classic harmonious colors, I'm gonna try it and see what happens. And you might end up liking it, and then somebody else might end up liking it.
Focused in North St. Louis County, Northside Art Association is a nonprofit 501c3 arts organization that serves local artists through community exposure, networking, education, and peer interaction. Learn more about Northside Art Association at www.northsideartassociation.org.